As much as I despise math, numbers can be very interesting and they are definitely very telling. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hi, this is Jan. Welcome to another episode on my channel, the Save Money and More with Jan channel. Thanks so much for being here. And of course, as always, I hope that everyone listening is doing very, very well. There you go. Let's talk about numbers for a minute. Did you ever notice the symbol when a person puts like their thumb up? The thumb up is like one thumb up in affirmation, like, yeah, I agree with you. Or like, yeah, you got this. That type of thing. Interesting. One thumb up. Well, recently, some may or may not recall, in case you've heard the video or not, I was discussing in exactitude a recent consumer price index listing changes in numbers over time. And one number really, it literally made me jump out of my skin. I wasn't so shocked about the gas being 47% higher than a few years back. No shocker. To be honest with you, none of them were shockers, but one of them to me was very, very telling in more like in personal ways that people are thinking about their money, and kind of scary too. One of the numbers that came up at that consumer price index was 44%. Are you sitting or standing? 44% people are in credit card debt. What? Yes, credit card debt increased to 44%. This is, you know me, how I feel about debt, okay? I would hate for anybody to fall into the rabbit hole of DEBT, debt. Many times I bring up that phrase, but that number, the 44% in and of itself, not only makes me sad, makes me, very sad, but it also frustrates me in such a way. Why is there so much credit card debt? Let's think about that. That is a huge red flag. That 44% out of 100% of Americans are in credit card debt. I ask myself why. Now, what do those numbers actually mean? What it tells me is a little bit of, well, maybe some people do not know how to manage a credit card, and there are people who are just not good managers of credit cards. Sorry to say. And then there are some people who use it as absolutely necessity. Like in other words, it's either they use it or they don't get their groceries. Okay? I'm just saying. So many people are using it out of necessity to buy a little bit of time to payday and hopefully pay that number, that bill off immediately and not fall into like what I call a serious rabbit hole of debt. But then there are others that consider their credit card as their emergency fund. You may use the card in an emergency situation to convey the cash over that you need to pay for something with. But that is not your emergency fund. And there is a completely different meaning to that. So I ask myself that. But here's what baffles me. Conversely, from the same news people, couple weeks prior, maybe, yeah, about 3 to 4 weeks ago, when it was Independence Day, the record for travel was like one of the hugest, like ever, for all forms of transportation. Flying is not necessarily a cheap thing to do. Gassing up your car, obviously, is not a cheap thing to do. So people were spending their money like crazy. I'm like, wait a minute, 44% card holders in credit card debt, and yet all this extravagant, crazy spending. Sometimes it's just our fault. And sometimes we make bad decisions. Let's just own it. Let's just skip over, all the sweetness and all that nicety that I am. Let's just be real, keeping it real. Sometimes we make heartfelt decisions on the fly. Let's talk about this for a minute. Because right now, we're in the middle, like definitely middle, going into almost like the latter part of the summer. Because once you hit August, for example, to me, that's the latter part of the summer. Let's face it. And then we fall into the ever so tempting holiday season. But Jan, it's still hot out. I'm still running to the beach. I hang out in my backyard and, catch a suntan. I get it. I get it. Yes, of course. Yes. And I am staying in the moment, but I'm talking about credit card use. Can't people, for once in their life, certain people that like to ignore a lot of stuff and then later on go, ooh, what happened? No, no, no. Isn't it better to think ahead once in a while? Isn't it better to avoid certain things? Like, for example, I'll backtrack it again to the beginning of the summer, okay? When all these people were flying high and spending money left and right. And I asked myself, well, hopefully they could pay it back, okay? Because that was, if you recall, it actually raised my um, red flag of thinking, and I pointed it out on the video that I was baffled by it. Well, here we are a few weeks later, and I'm even more baffled by it. Because how can these reports come out? 44% of Americans in credit card debt. To me, these numbers are staggering. They are not to be taken lightly. And with the interest rates and all that, we need to sometimes own our mistakes. We need to sometimes admit, well, maybe we were just acting too hastily. We need to think and say, you know what, you're right. I didn't think enough. But then we take a breath, and it's always good to be forgiving. Self forgiveness is very important. Take a self forgiveness and say, you know what? I'm going to take measures to avoid this. People using their credit cards as emergency fund, as if it is their emergency fund. I remember people, and I literally saw somebody do this, not just a few people randomly in separate intervals. This might have been about, I don't know, I was not on YouTube yet, maybe about a year or two prior to being on YouTube. People like opening up their wallet and bragging, showing me all their credit cards. I'm like, okay. And you're showing me these because. So I called it out. I said to every one of them, I said, well, you might think that's a big honor that you're credit worthy. And for that, okay. But here's the thing, do you realize all that temptation in your wallet? Can you imagine if you owed a balance on every single one of those 10 or 12 cards? And yes, years later, I heard stories, not from those people. Okay, thankfully, they scathed over it. And I don't know, maybe something I said got through to them. But I mean, people were bragging. And there are some people that literally thought that it was like a badge of honor to say, hey, I have 15 credit cards. And you're telling me this because I look at it this way, that's 15 opportunities to go into heavy debt, DEBT, if one is not careful. Listen, yes, it is good to have credit cards. And yes, if handled properly, they can be your friend, but you have to respect it. You have to respect that money, okay? But when I hear staggering numbers, like 44% of Americans are in credit card debt, I'm sorry. It gives me pause to wonder why.